Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and the one show that people have been requesting me to watch a bunch of times now is Amphibia, a Disney Channel cartoon about a 13-year-old girl stumbling upon a frog village and trying to get back home. I was also excited to watch the show because it looked like a very fun cartoon that would also happen to have a really good story. So I finally binge-watched the entire first season and meh. I mean, it wasn't bad or anything, but it wasn't really the great show I was expecting. But I do know that a lot of people enjoy the show, and I think that's great. Keep enjoying it. These are just my personal gripes. I'm going to try to be as fair as I possibly can here. And to do that, I'm going to start by talking about the things I did like about the show. I really enjoy the world that the show takes place in. There's a ton of different places and different side characters. It really feels like a fully fleshed out world. It feels like each character genuinely has their own lives, and it's pretty neat. Also, the art on the show is just gorgeous. Great attention to detail. The show can also be pretty funny at times. It has a sort of weird sense of humor, but it honestly kinda works for me. The humor along with the world building is what initially made me stick with the show. But the show has two gaping flaws which honestly soured my opinion on the whole thing, with the first of those being the characters. The main character of the show is Anne, a 13-year-old girl who was transported to the world of Amphibia. Her character sort of reminds me of Philip J. Fry from Futurama, in that she's your average human being who got tossed into a new world that she doesn't understand. Except unlike Fry, Anne doesn't really have much of a personality. She's kind, at least when the plot wants her to be, and she's sort of adventurous. But there's not really anything that makes her stand out compared to most other kids show protagonists. She's overall just a very average character. Then there's Sprig, a 10-year-old frog boy who, likes adventure and is kind at least when the plot wants him to be. A major problem with the show is that Anne and Sprig kind of feel like the same character. The only main difference is that where Anne is new to this world, Sprig has lived there his entire life. I'm not saying your characters have to be polar opposites, but there should at least be something differentiating them. Sure, Finn and Jake both love adventuring, but Jake is more go with the flow while Finn prefers to dive in head first. Sure, Mordecai and Rigby are both slackers, but Mordecai at least tries to be somewhat responsible while Rigby is just lazy. Sure, Gumball and Darwin are both childish, but Darwin has more of a moral code than Gumball. Then there's Polly. Stop if you've heard this one before. Polly is a cute, innocent, sweet little girl who is also very violent and dangerous. I really don't like Polly. Not only is her character archetype very cliché, but I find her voice to be incredibly grating, and she's rarely ever funny. There are at least 2 episodes dedicated to her, and neither of them are any good. Last, but I guess not least, there's Hop Hop. He's okay, I guess. He's your typical old man character. Very stuck in his ways, enjoys his peace, is an authority figure. He kinda just feels like a neutered version of Grunkle Stan from Gravity Falls. But again, he's pretty okay. Overall, these characters just aren't very interesting. Most of them lack more than 2 different personality traits, and when you have a quote-unquote story-based cartoon like this one, that's not a good thing. Speaking of which, this show has very little overarching story, which is fine, not every show needs one, but when your first episode teases a more story-driven cartoon, you should probably stay consistent with that. But instead, the show just kind of lingers around, with a good majority of the episodes just kind of being one-offs. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one to just automatically hate filler episodes. Filler episodes can be a good way to spend downtime with these characters, and can also be very entertaining in their own rights. But the problem is, almost every episode is a filler episode, so it feels less like the show is just letting its characters have downtime, and more so that it just used the first episode to get people hooked, and then decide not to have a story. Like, about halfway through the season, there's this crazy shift in perspective episode, and it's great, probably the best episode of the entire show, but then it's completely forgotten until the season finale. And when this plot point finally does come back again, it just kind of feels underwhelming, because there's very little build-up to it, and it just kind of feels like it's there because it's the season finale, and it has to be. But hey, even if the show could potentially be doing more with its story, an episodic cartoon isn't necessarily bad. There are plenty of episodic cartoons I enjoy. Though unfortunately, the show's stories are not the most original out there. You have such inspired ideas, such as character thinking that everyone likes him, then realizing that there's this one person who doesn't like him. He tries to make her like him, and then realize that not everyone has to like him. Or how about kid character challenges adult character's responsibilities, then takes over for him, and realizes that it wasn't as easy as he thought. Or how about character avoiding their responsibilities, then realizing that they shouldn't do that. Or how about kid character deciding that she wants independence from her authority figure, only to realize that she shouldn't grow up too fast. Which is a moral I hate, by the way. Oh, and last but certainly least, character lies. I could stop right there. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the show having morals, but first off, most of the morals in the show are completely cliche and morals that we've heard time and time again. But the show executes it in the absolute worst way possible, by having characters directly state to the audience what they learned. I hate this because it takes away any sort of nuance or thought or conversation that could have been had about the show. The reason why this scene in Futurama is so perfect is because everything we need to know about what Fry learned is stated not through the character directly saying it, but through what he does and his body language. If Amphibia keeps doing what it's doing now, then they will never have a scene as good as this. In the show's defense, there were at least a couple episodes I enjoyed. Snow Day is a pretty fun and chill episode with some gorgeous animation, probably my favorite episode besides that one in the middle I already talked about. As well as that, Family Shrub is a pretty fun adventure episode that actually adds quite a bit of nice lore to the Planter family. But the few episodes I did like don't erase the fact that most of the episodes are just completely boring. Oh, and I haven't even gotten to my least favorite episode yet. My least favorite Amphibia episode is a lily pad tie. In this episode, Anne gives Stumpy's restaurant a makeover in order to impress a critic. I hate the way the critic is portrayed here. He's just a one-dimensional meanie who wants to close down the restaurant because he's a jerk, I guess. I'm not expecting Ratatouille levels of depth, but critics are very important, and the way this episode just kind of portrays them as annoying and petty really bothers me. It honestly baffles me how people could compare this show to Gravity Falls, since that show's first season is a lot better than this one. Not only does it build Gideon up as a villain leading to an epic season finale, but it still has ongoing side stories, such as Dipper's rivalry with Robbie and Mabel's boy problems. But it still makes room for one-off episodes that don't really contribute much to the overall story, but are still fun to watch. Meanwhile, Amphibia just kind of stumbles around until its season finale when it remembers, oh yeah, we're a story-driven cartoon. As far as the season finale goes, I thought it was decent, but seriously negatively impacted by the lack of build-up to it. The episode wants me to feel emotional, but I never really got attached to these characters. It doesn't really feel like the characters grew or changed as the show progressed. This could have been episode 5, and it really wouldn't have been any different. The show is getting a second season, but honestly I don't think I'm gonna be watching it. The show failed to get me hooked, and I honestly don't really care about what happens next in the story, if anything even happens next. If you want a show that's on the same level as Gravity Falls, just watch the DuckTales reboot. It's so much better than Amphibia. But I know my opinion here isn't necessarily the most popular, so if you do enjoy Amphibia, then more power to you, and please let me know why in the comments. And have a good day. Kirby, out.